Tonight, the strike is close to over for UAW Ford workers after the union and the company reached a tentative deal last night. The terms of the deal still need to be approved by union leadership and members, but employees have been told to return to work while this voting process plays out.
Meanwhile, workers continue to walk the picket line for General Motors and Stellantis on day 42 of the strike. Just this week, the UAW hit the companies at their most profitable plants, increasing the pressure and inflicting some more pain.
Continuing our conversation tonight, our Wayne State Professor of Management, Marick Masters, and former UAW spokesperson, Brian Rothenberg. Thank you both for joining us.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you. So, Marick, what do you think is the potential of this deal with Ford to have a domino effect on the other two companies?
I think there's a very high probability that it will result in a settlement in the near future. There are still some difficult issues to resolve, but I think the elements of a pattern agreement are in place. I wouldn't be surprised after a few days of hard bargaining that we had tentative agreements across the board.
And what comes next for the union deal, Brian? This is for you. What work is conducted by both sides as the deal works toward approval?
So right now, people at Solidarity House are very busy preparing, both getting the contracts ready to go online when they have their vote on Sunday of the council. They also have to summarize these huge books into a very short sort of summary and then get all of those things printed. That is a Herculean task by the staff. Then on Sunday, all of the members of the Ford Council, all of their leadership will come to town, and they have to pass it in order for it to go for ratification. And then the next step after that would be members voting. If the members were to vote it down, you would go back to the table. I think there's a high probability that this will do well. It's a record contract, it really is, but we'll have to see. It's really up to the members. It's their employment contract.
Yeah, and that leads us to the next question. Marick, what do you think the likelihood is that they will ratify this? And is it typically an overwhelming majority, or does it come down pretty close sometimes?
Well, it depends on how satisfied members are and after they see the details. The devil is in the details on these things, and they'll ask lots of questions and be concerned about how it applies to them directly. But I think it is a record contract, and they have a lot to sell to the members, and I would be very surprised if it were rejected. I would say that it would have a significant majority in favor of it, but it may not be an overwhelming number.
Yeah, but even with that, there is a chance that it could be rejected. So, Brian, if that does happen, what are the next steps? And have you gathered any sentiments from membership about how they are feeling about this deal?
So, what I've heard so far are people that are pretty excited about this deal. But what I can tell you is, yes, in the past, in rare occasions, they have been voted down in the big three. They have been voted down in some of the other sectors as well. And what happens is you go back, you try to identify what the issues are, and you go back and bargain. That's not a bad thing. It just means the members made a decision and they needed some things fixed. Sometimes it's an economic issue. Sometimes it's an issue that has to do with things like mandatory overtime or those type of issues. So I don't anticipate that'll happen this time, but even if it does, it just means you go back to the table, iron it out, and the basic pattern would stay the same. It's just working out those individual issues if that's the case.
Brian, I'm curious if you can tell us, based on your experience with the UAW, what happens in this interim period as some of the Ford workers are going back to work, but the deal hasn't been ratified yet? Are they still being paid from the strike fund? Are they being paid by the company based on the old contract or the proposed one?
I have to see what the terms are, but I'm almost certain what will happen is they'll start getting paid immediately back by Ford, and they'll be off strike fund pay. And that they'll be sort of cycling in as they reopen the plants. These are very big, complex plants, so some things like the paint department require a lot of technical work to get up and running. But my guess is that they'll all be back soon. In the case of the Kentucky plant, where they had a lot of cash in those F-150s that went down, they do have things like summer breaks and Christmas breaks where they get extra time off. Sometimes they call them shutdowns. My guess is maybe they'll make it up and shorten the shutdown a little bit. and things will be back to normal in terms of what they lost.
Marick, with the Ford deal at play, what does this mean for GM and Stellantis? Do they look at that deal and use it as a playbook?
Well, I think they will look at the deal when they see the details of it very carefully. And the union, as Brian said, will insist on a pattern. They may allow some minor deviation on an issue here or there to accommodate special needs of the companies, but they're going to look for things to be basically the same. So they'll know that whatever that deal is at Ford is something that the union is going to insist that they counter. And if there are gaps between their positions and the Ford's position, the UAW will ask that they close those gaps.
So we have the record deal with Ford, the potential for 2 more record deals with GM and Stellantis. If you are an auto worker in the southern United States in a non-unionized shop, what are you thinking right now when you're hearing about these record deals?
Well, I think you're going to look carefully and think, how much better off are they as a result of these deals than I am? And is the overall environment of having a union present better? Is it worth the cost of having a union? Because everybody knows that, putting aside what you feel about unions, employers resist unions when they come in. So workers take a risk when they go out and support a union, and they know that there could be negative repercussions for those who strongly advocate it. At the same time, they're going to look at their situation and say, these are my wages. We don't have a union, an outside third party that we don't know. And they're going to have to overcome the animosity that's going to build whenever a union tries to organize. You can rest assured the company will mobilize against it, and outside forces will come in and do the same.
And we've seen some failed attempts like that before.
Failed attempts, and they're often very strongly supported by outside groups that spend lots of money.
All right, and Bill, one thing that Bill Ford said a week or 2 ago, he talked about getting back to family. How does that work when those workers get back to the assembly line?
Oh, well, it's like going to Thanksgiving dinner with your uncle that you don't agree with politically. You're still a family. You still have those common bonds. And I think most Ford workers, even if they were pushing very hard because they knew this was their time to get a record contract like this, they feel very strongly about Ford. I do want to say one thing about the South. First of all, the UAW has a lot of members in the South, but secondly, I think a lot of those plants, they'll try to at least raise salaries a little bit to try to prevent it. But more to the point, I do think they're going to see this and see this movement, and you're going to start to see a change in that dynamic. I think it's already starting. There's just a new drive toward workers having a voice at that table.
Yeah, a lot of energy, momentum around organized labor right now. Professor Marick Masters and former UAW spokesperson Brian Rothenberg, thank you both for your insight today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.